Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight, we're setting off on a gentle journey into the distant corners of possibility, a question so old and so quietly enormous, it hums beneath the surface of everything we are. Can humans evolve further? It's a question that floats between bedtime wonder and biology textbook, between science fiction and slow afternoon thoughts. We look in the mirror and see ourselves, arms, legs, thumbs, teeth, thoughts. But what if we're still unfinished? Not broken, not incomplete, just midway. A pause in a longer story. Are we the final draft of our species, or just the latest footnote? Let me ask. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Are you curled up in the soft quiet of early morning, or is it late and starry where you are? Does the air feel like now, or already a little bit like tomorrow? And if you find this voyage comforting, curious, or just a peaceful way to let your mind rest after a long day, it would mean the world if you tapped like or subscribed. It helps this sleepy corner of the internet drift toward others who might need it too. But don't worry, this isn't the kind of question you need to answer right away, or at all. So settle in, soften your thoughts, and let's begin. Because somewhere between the fossils beneath our feet and the futures we've only just begun to imagine, lies the question of what we might become. Have you ever stood still in a crowded street or stared quietly into a mirror and thought, how strange it is to be a person? 2 legs, walking upright, a brain that dreams, plans, worries, fingers made for grasping tools, typing messages, holding someone's hand. How often do we stop to notice just how oddly specific we are? And stranger still, to realize that none of it was designed, not deliberately. We weren't sculpted like statues. We weren't programmed like machines. We evolved, slowly, unpredictably, through storms of mutation and chance, which makes you wonder, if we've come this far, what happens next? It's an unsettling thought, quietly thrilling. The idea that we, the current model of Homo sapiens, might not be the final version. That evolution hasn't stopped or paused, but is still humming beneath the surface of every breath, every birth, every blink. Of course, on a typical Tuesday, we don't really feel like evolving. We feel like checking email, finding clean socks, avoiding awkward conversations, or daydreaming about lunch. Life, for most of us, feels stable, predictable, human. We don't feel like transitional species. We feel like the end of the line. But perhaps that's the trick of it. We're always inside the current version. The present feels permanent until it doesn't. Think of childhood. When you were small, did you ever imagine how tall you'd grow? What your adult face would look like? Your voice? Probably not. You just lived, grew, changed without noticing. And yet one day you looked back and realized the person you were had quietly become someone else. Maybe evolution is like that too. Not dramatic or obvious, but subtle, gradual, hidden in plain sight. We like to think of evolution as ancient, a dusty museum word belonging to fossils and diagrams. But it's not locked in the past. It's now, always now. You and I, we are the ancestors of something that does not yet exist. There's a strange, dreamy feeling that comes with that realization. Almost like looking at a blurry photograph of the future, wondering which parts will still be recognizable. Will future humans still laugh the way we do? Still argue about the best way to load a dishwasher? Still cry at stories? Or sing in the shower? Or will they be something else entirely? The question, can humans evolve further, brushes up against our deepest assumptions, not just about science, but about self, about who we are, and whether we even means the same thing across centuries. Some people find the idea uncomfortable. Change, after all, can be unsettling. The thought that our species might morph, might drift away from what we currently are, It's a little like standing at the edge of a foggy path, unsure whether to feel excited or nostalgic for something that hasn't ended yet. But others feel wonder, hope even. If evolution is still with us, maybe that means we're not stuck, not doomed to repeat the same mistakes forever. Maybe the future holds possibilities we can't yet imagine. New strengths, deeper empathy, clearer thought. Of course, it also raises the question, evolve how? What more could we possibly become? We walk upright, we speak, we build cities, we write symphonies and code, we dream up particle accelerators and poetry. Surely we've reached the top of the ladder. But evolution doesn't have a top. It doesn't care about ladders. It's not progress in a moral or intellectual sense. It's just change over time, adaptation to environment. And environment, well, that never stops shifting. Consider technology. Once we evolved to survive in forests and plains. Now we live in apartments and algorithmic ecosystems. We spend hours scrolling, tapping, absorbing data at speeds no ancient human could have imagined. Our world is no longer tooth and claw, it's touchscreen and bandwidth. Are our minds evolving to keep up? Or are we still wired for the past, anxious, overstimulated, trying to make sense of a digital jungle with a hunter-gatherer brain? Some scientists believe that evolution is already happening, just not in the way we used to imagine. It's not about growing a third eye or developing telepathy. It's quieter, genetic tweaks in our immune system, slight shifts in metabolism, changing responses to stress or social interaction. A slow nudge in what traits get passed on. Others wonder if cultural evolution has taken the wheel, that what shapes us now isn't biology alone, but ideas, language, norms, inventions. In this view, evolution isn't only in the flesh, but in the flow of knowledge, behaviour, memory. Think of how quickly the world has changed in just a few generations. Your great-grandparents likely never touched a smartphone. Your ancestors didn't worry about Wi-Fi or sleep apps or space tourism, and yet, here you are, listening to a science podcast about human evolution. Maybe in bed, maybe under a blanket, maybe just hoping your brain will slow down for a bit. You, dear listener, are already proof that evolution is stranger and more wondrous than we usually give it credit for. There's a paradox at the heart of it. Humans are the only species we know of that knows it's evolving. We study our own history, predict our own future, build tools not just to survive, but to reshape ourselves. And that changes the game, because the moment we understand evolution, we begin to influence it. Through medicine, we change who survives. Through technology, we change how we live. Through culture, we change what we value. And now, with genetic editing on the horizon, we're stepping into territory no species has ever entered, directing our own design. Some find this thrilling, others terrifying. Either way, it invites reflection. If we can choose how to evolve, what would we choose? Smarter brains, healthier bodies, greater cooperation, or just more screen-resistant attention spans? And what if the future isn't in one direction but many? Not a ladder, but a branching tree. Multiple human futures shaped by different values, environments and tools. A kind of evolutionary kaleidoscope. That's the strange, beautiful thing about wondering where we're going. It always leads back to where we are, to this body, this mind, this particular stretch of human time. So the next time you catch a reflection and wonder if this is what humans are meant to be, just remember, we're never finished. We're the middle chapter of a book still being written line by line, breath by breath. And that, even in the quiet moments, is a little bit magnificent. Long before DNA was discovered, before the word evolution ever existed, people wondered how we became what we are, and whether we might someday become something else. We've always been storytellers, and for thousands of years, before microscopes and genome sequencing, we told the story of ourselves in myth, metaphor and imagination. In many ancient cultures, Human origins weren't described in terms of mutation and selection, but of divine breath, cosmic accidents, or celestial artistry. We were made, shaped, chosen. Our forms were not random but sacred. The ancient Greeks imagined Prometheus shaping humans out of clay, stealing fire from the gods to bring us intellect. In this view, we weren't beasts slowly improving over eons. We were handmade, sparked into being, and perhaps not entirely done yet. In Norse mythology, the first humans, Ask and Embla, were carved from driftwood and brought to life by the gods. Breath, mind, and warmth added like layers of light. Across indigenous traditions, there are stories of multiple creations, humans made and remade in different forms, over cycles of time. Some failed, some were unfinished, others were learning, becoming. These weren't scientific models, but they weren't meant to be. They were mirrors for wonder, containers for mystery. They asked a question we still ask today. Are we complete or still unfolding? And then there are the transformation myths, tales of gods becoming animals, humans turning into trees or changing shape with the moon. These stories whisper something we've always felt. That form is not fixed. That change is possible. That identity, even at its most solid, might be softer than it seems. In many cultures, there's also the idea that humans can ascend, not physically, but spiritually. That evolution is an inner journey, the path from ignorance to wisdom, selfishness to compassion, a kind of emotional evolution. Buddhism speaks of reaching enlightenment, transcending suffering and desire, not through genetic change, but through deep awareness. In Christianity, the idea of becoming more Christ-like reflects a moral evolution, a transformation of the heart. And perhaps that's the thread that runs through so many of these ancient ideas, that becoming more than we are is not just possible, but desirable. We aren't simply bodies with brains, we're minds with longing. We imagine what we could be. We project ourselves into the stars, the future, the divine. Which brings us to a strange truth. The question, can humans evolve further, is both a biological one and a philosophical one, a question of genes and dreams. Even before Darwin, people sensed that humanity had a story, not a static one, but a journey. But when Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, everything changed. The story shifted. Creation became process. Design became descent. We were no longer separate from nature, but deeply entangled in it, one branch on the great tangled tree of life, not above the animals, among them. Evolution, Darwin proposed, was slow and blind, driven by variation, competition, and survival. No goals, no destiny, just adaptation. And yet, for humans, this truth arrived like thunder. Because for the first time we had a framework that didn't just explain our past, but suggested something more radical. That we were still evolving. Darwin himself wasn't sure what would come next for humanity. He saw our social instincts as part of our fitness. Empathy, cooperation, fairness. Traits that helped us survive not as individuals but as communities. He believed evolution had shaped our morality. That kindness too could be adaptive. But he also warned that culture and comfort might slow natural selection, that we were changing the rules of our own game, and in a way, we were. With the rise of civilization, humans began reshaping their environments faster than evolution could catch up. We built shelters, wore clothing, cooked food, and shared knowledge. These innovations reduced some of the pressures that had once guided our evolution. We no longer needed fur to survive the cold, or larger jaws to chew raw roots, or perfect eyesight to spot danger in the dark. Instead, we needed memory, language, imagination. Human evolution began to intertwine with something new, culture. Language, in particular, was a turning point. It allowed us to pass down information, to learn from one another, to build on ideas. Cultural evolution, the spread and refinement of behaviours, beliefs, and technologies, began to outpace genetic evolution. In essence, we stopped waiting for biology to catch up. We started inventing ourselves, and the pace quickened, from stone tools to space stations in a geological blink, from cave paintings to virtual reality. Our minds and machines became co-creators of our future. This has led some to ask, are we still evolving in the traditional sense, or have we entered a new chapter? Some scientists argue that biological evolution has slowed, at least in populations with access to modern medicine and stable environments. Traits that might once have hindered survival are no longer automatic filters. Babies born prematurely now survive. People with genetic disorders live full lives. Natural selection, they suggest, has loosened its grip. But others see evolution continuing, just differently, shaped by modern pressures, by urban life, global diets, sedentary habits, social dynamics. Genes are still mutating. Some traits are still being passed on more than others. The dance hasn't stopped, just changed tempo. And then there's artificial selection, the ways we choose to shape ourselves, through medicine, nutrition, fitness, cosmetic surgery, through decisions about reproduction, genetic screening, and in the not-too-distant future, perhaps even gene editing. CRISPR, the gene editing technology that allows scientists to cut and paste sections of DNA, has opened doors once only dreamed of. The ability to correct genetic diseases or enhance certain traits. It's the stuff of science fiction, now being tested in labs. Some see it as the next step in human evolution by intention. Others worry it crosses a line, that once we start deciding what kind of humans to make, we risk creating inequality, even division, between the edited and the unedited, between what we are and what we think we should be. The ethics are deep, tangled, and still unfolding. But one thing is clear, humanity is stepping into the role of its own sculptor, and it's not just genes. Technology, wearable, implantable, even neural, is blending with our biology. Brain-computer interfaces, prosthetics controlled by thought, augmented reality, digital memory. Are we evolving into something post-human? Science fiction has long imagined it. Cyborgs, uploading consciousness, merging with machines, not just evolving physically, but digitally. But while these visions may seem extreme, the roots are already here, in the devices we carry, the data we generate, the ways our attention and memory are shaped by algorithms. Some thinkers believe this is part of cultural evolution too, that humans have always externalized their minds, first with cave paintings, then with writing, then with the internet. Your smartphone, in a way, is already part of your cognitive toolkit. It holds your calendar, your contacts, your memories, a kind of second brain. So, is this evolution or something else? It depends on how we define it. If evolution means change over time, adaptation to new environments, selection of traits that persist, then yes, we are still evolving. Through genes, through ideas, through tools. But if evolution means random mutation filtered by nature alone, then perhaps we've left that path behind. Or are at least building a parallel one. And here's where culture once again becomes the hidden engine. Different cultures shape different traits. In some societies, collaboration is prized. In others, competition. Some raise children with independence, others with interdependence. These values ripple across generations, shaping not just how we behave, but who we become. Even beauty standards, whereas what features are admired, desired, selected, can influence evolution subtly. Traits that are culturally preferred may become biologically common, given time and enough selection pressure. It's a strange, quiet kind of feedback loop. Culture influencing biology, biology influencing culture. And all the while, The question hums in the background like a lullaby just beyond hearing. What might we become next? Will we evolve toward greater empathy, more efficient bodies, longer lifespans? Will we become more connected or more divided? Will we even look the same? Some futurists imagine a divergence, that as humans colonize new environments like space or develop radically different technologies, we may split into subgroups, each adapted to their niche. Some tall, lean and engineered for Mars, others fused with AI, still others living low-tech lives by choice. It's a strange mirror of the past, just as humans once spread across the Earth, adapting to climate and terrain. We may someday radiate outward again, this time into new worlds, new interfaces, new identities. But for now, we are here, breathing, wondering, imagining, still so beautifully human, and maybe just a little unfinished. Let's begin with the basics, the soft, slow scaffolding beneath it all. In biology, evolution isn't magic or fate or forward motion toward perfection. It's not about better or smarter. It's not a staircase. It's a branching tree. A web of trial, error, and ongoing experiments. Evolution is simply this: change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. That's it. Genes shifting, frequencies of traits rising and falling, mutations happening by chance. Some are helpful, some are harmful, and most are just there. Quiet passengers on the journey. And what drives this change? 4 main forces. You could call them the winds that shape the evolutionary sea. Natural selection, where traits that help organisms survive and reproduce tend to spread. A longer neck reaches higher leaves. A better immune response fights off more infections. Those genes stick around. Mutation, the random spark. A copying error, a genetic typo. It might do nothing, or it might create something new. Every trait you see in the world, every colour of petal or curl of tail or freckle on your skin, began once as a change. Gene flow, where populations mix and their genes mingle. Like ink swirling into water, migration spreads variation and genetic drift, the randomness of life itself. Sometimes traits spread or disappear not because they help, but because of sheer chance. Like flipping coins in a small group, even the unlikely outcomes can become normal if enough time passes. All of this has shaped humanity, our brains, our posture, our sweat glands and vocal cords, the way our hands curve just so, all born from the slow, soft pressures of evolutionary time. But here's the question: is it still happening? And the answer, gently but certainly, is yes. Humans are still evolving. The difference is, we're evolving in a world we've reshaped, and that changes everything. Once, survival depended on endurance, instincts, adapting to cold or heat or hunger. Now, in many places, survival depends on access to healthcare, education, stability, connection, and those pressures still influence who thrives, which genes continue, which bodies and minds carry forward the thread of life. One striking example is lactose tolerance. Most mammals lose the ability to digest milk after weaning. It's normal. But in some human populations, mostly in Europe, parts of the Middle East, and East Africa, a genetic mutation allowed people to keep digesting lactose into adulthood. Why? Because those communities domesticated animals. They drank milk, and those who could digest it had an extra source of calories, especially during times of scarcity. Over generations, that tiny genetic change spread. That's evolution, recent, visible, still measurable in your cereal bowl. Another example lies in malaria resistance. In regions where malaria is common, genetic traits like the sickle cell mutation persist because they offer protection. Even though sickle cell disease can be life-threatening, carrying just one copy of the gene helps prevent malaria infection. A harsh trade-off. But in evolutionary terms, one that has endured. And then there's skin colour. As humans migrated out of Africa, and into regions with less sunlight, darker skin, which protects against ultraviolet radiation, became a disadvantage. The body needed vitamin D produced with help from sunlight, so lighter skin began to emerge, allowing people to synthesize enough of the vitamin even in cloudier climates. Skin color is one of the most visible examples of recent human evolution, not a mark of race or hierarchy, but of environment, sunlight, adaptation. It reminds us that much of what we take for granted about ourselves is shaped by the land, the air, the sky, and evolution responds. But now many of those environments have changed. We no longer need to outrun predators. We have shoes and doors and passwords. Many of us aren't limited by seasonal food. We've built a buffer between ourselves and the wild, and so the selective pressures that shaped us for hundreds of thousands of years have softened, or morphed. So what drives evolution now? Some scientists suggest that reproduction itself is the new frontier. In a world where survival is often less of a filter, it's fertility. Who has children, when, and how many? That plays a central role in passing on genes. Studies have begun to look at traits linked to family size, like personality, age of puberty, and even educational attainment, and how they might influence reproductive patterns across generations. It's a delicate topic, full of nuance and uncertainty. But the key idea is this: if a trait leads to more offspring, it becomes more common over time. That doesn't mean the trait is better, just more passed on. That's evolution, sometimes subtle, sometimes invisible, always happening. And not all evolution happens at the level of the species. It can happen at the level of populations, groups living in different places, facing different conditions with different habits, foods, customs, challenges. In Tibet, for instance, some populations have developed genetic adaptations for high-altitude life. Better oxygen use, improved circulation. They can live and thrive where most of us would struggle. In the Arctic, Inuit populations show signs of adaptation to a high-fat diet, processing certain fats more efficiently, a trait that likely helped survival in extreme cold with limited plant foods. These aren't ancient shifts, they're relatively recent by evolutionary standards, within the last 10,000 years, which means we're still changing, still becoming. Even now, scientists are identifying regions of the human genome that seem to be under active selection, areas where genetic variation is shrinking or shifting, as some versions of genes outcompete others. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with superpowers or glowing skin, but it's real. The question then becomes not whether we're evolving, but in what direction. And that's harder to say, because we're not evolving in nature anymore, we're evolving in culture. In a world where success isn't about strength but attention, not hunting skills but social navigation, memory, creativity, the ability to manage stress, or multitask, or find calm in chaos. It's possible that traits like emotional regulation, adaptability, and empathy may now be under a new kind of selective pressure, not from tigers or temperatures, but from society itself. And that opens a quiet, profound question. Could we be evolving toward gentleness, toward better communication, deeper connection, not because it's noble, but because in a complex world those traits help us raise children, build trust, form networks? Maybe evolution in some places is selecting not for brawn, but for kindness. And maybe that's its own kind of progress, even if evolution doesn't believe in progress. So far we've talked about mutations, gene flow, and biological adaptation, about oxygen in the mountains and milk in our tea. But there's another way humans might be evolving, not just through flesh and bone, but through behavior, our psychology, our attention, our emotions. In the modern world, we no longer rely purely on physical traits to survive. We navigate cities, not savannas. We decode social cues, juggle dozens of abstract tasks, and spend long hours managing uncertainty. It's possible, even likely, that our brains are being shaped by this. Not in a sudden, cinematic way. No one is growing extra memory slots overnight. But over generations, small variations in behaviour and cognition may subtly shift the species. Take stress, for example. We're built to handle danger in short bursts. The rustle of a predator, the flash of lightning. But now, many of us live in states of low-level, prolonged tension. Traffic, finances, the endless hum of online noise. Some people seem naturally more resilient, better at calming themselves, at pausing, breathing, and adapting. Could those traits, quiet patience, emotional flexibility, become evolutionarily favoured? Could future humans be a little more steady? Maybe. Or maybe attention is the new frontier. Our ancestors needed to focus on physical threats. Today the threat is distraction, a constant flicker of information, advertisement, stimulus. Some people are better at filtering. They find deep focus more easily. Could that too shape who succeeds, who creates, who raises the next generation? Or language? Speech was one of our earliest tools, but now we need more than words. We need empathy, subtext, nuance, the ability to read between the lines in a world where tone can travel faster than truth. Some theorists suggest that even our personalities may slowly evolve in response to modern pressures. Openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, traits that help us collaborate, imagine, persist, might tilt the odds ever so slightly over decades, then centuries. Still others wonder if we're not just evolving biologically, but self-editing. And here the line between natural and unnatural begins to dissolve. We've entered a time where we don't only adapt to our world, we alter ourselves to match it. Through diet, fitness, biohacking, and increasingly, technology. Think about it. Glasses used to be a disadvantage. Bad eyesight could cost you dearly in a world where survival depended on aim, perception, and awareness. Now, corrective lenses are everywhere. Laser surgery, voice-to-text, augmented displays, soon perhaps neural implants. We've begun to outsource weakness, to blur the line between ability and assistance, and in doing so, we open a new evolutionary doorway. Because if technology can compensate for biology, if a chip can help someone walk or remember or focus, then the old rules of selection begin to fray. No longer is it about the best genes, it's about the best tools. In this new world, evolution might favour the most integrated, the most adaptive, not at the muscular or cellular level, but at the level of interface. How well do you merge with the tools around you? How fluently can you dance with the machines? This isn't science fiction anymore. Already we've created devices that link thought to action, brain-computer interfaces that allow people to move robotic limbs with intention alone, implants that can bypass damaged neurons, memory aids that whisper reminders. If these technologies improve and become widespread, we may see a shift, not in our DNA, but in our dependence. A co-evolution between human and machine. Some call this cyborg evolution. Others, transhumanism, the belief that humanity can and should use technology to transcend its biological limitations, longevity, intelligence, emotion, even consciousness itself. It's not just about fixing what's broken, but expanding what's possible. And while some see this as a beautiful next step, a leap toward new forms of experience, others see danger, inequality, loss of autonomy, a future where only some evolve and others are left behind. The ethics are vast, the questions tender. What does it mean to improve a human? Who decides which traits are better, smarter, more worthy? And what happens when our tools begin to shape not just how we live, but what we are? Already algorithms influence our choices, our attention, our emotions. We shape them, and they shape us. And if we keep refining that loop, we might someday build systems that simulate evolution. Artificial intelligences that create, adapt, and improve without human input. Could they evolve? Could they outpace us? Could the next phase of evolution be something we create but cannot control? Some philosophers suggest that evolution isn't about species or flesh or even reproduction, but about complexity, and wherever complexity grows, evolution follows. In that view, humanity is a bridge, not the destination, but the crossing, and beyond us. Well, that's harder to imagine, but even if we stay biological, even if no neural implants or robot extensions arrive, our evolution still continues in quieter, stranger ways, inside our cells, in the rhythms of birth and death, in the ways we fall in love, care for each other, build meaning, make art. Even language evolves, faster than genes, new words, new metaphors, new ways of thinking. Culture evolves, norms shift, kindness spreads, sometimes. And all of it changes the terrain in which biology lives. It's not one thing, this human future. It's 1,000 threads, braided together. Genetics, behaviour, technology, belief. And we're not watching it from the outside, we are it. We are the current version of an ancient experiment, still open, still running, still becoming. So when we ask, can humans evolve further? The answer is not just yes. The answer is we already are, right now, with every choice, every mutation, every click, every cradle, every connection, not forward toward perfection, just onward, toward whatever comes next. And maybe, just maybe, the most human thing about us is that we get to wonder about it. When we think about evolution, we tend to picture bones, hunched hominins in dusty textbooks. But beneath the skulls and museum glass is something quieter, the machinery of change, and that machinery is still humming. Let's begin, not in the bones, but in the brain. The brain that builds itself. Of all the strange things our species can do, crafting telescopes, writing lullabies, arguing about whether cereal is a soup, perhaps the strangest is this: our brains are still building themselves long after we're born. This is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself in response to experience. It's why you can learn a new language, pick up an instrument, recover after an injury. It's why memories shift, habits form, and pain fades. In infants, this plasticity is high, neurons firing like lightning in all directions, connections forming at staggering speed. But even in adults, the brain remains flexible. Not infinitely, but enough. From an evolutionary perspective, that's extraordinary. Most animals are born with the behaviour they need. A bird doesn't need to be taught how to fly. A deer doesn't need classes in walking. But humans, we arrive half-assembled. We need years of teaching, modelling, failure, guidance. Why? Because evolution traded pre-programmed instinct for adaptable intelligence, and that has allowed us to survive in an astonishing variety of environments, from frozen tundras to tropical forests, from mountain caves to glass skyscrapers. Instead of evolving new instincts for every habitat, we evolved the ability to learn them. That flexibility is part of our genius, and also, sometimes, our vulnerability. We're good at adapting, but not always fast enough. Our brains evolved for cooperation, storytelling, rhythm, and social problem-solving, not for 100 notifications an hour or curated news feeds tailored to our attention span. The question becomes, will our brains evolve to meet the modern world? Or will we need to reshape the world to protect our brains? Some scientists think subtle changes may already be occurring. Shifts in emotional regulation, risk tolerance, processing speed. Not across a lifetime, but across generations. Tiny changes, nudging us one way or another. Others believe cultural tools will keep moving faster than biology ever could, meaning we'll rely more on external adaptation than the internal change. Glasses instead of sharper eyes. Meditation apps instead of deeper wiring. Soundproof headphones instead of better filtering. And that's a pattern we'll return to again and again, because human evolution may now be more about systems than species, which leads us into another gentle subtopic: B. The quiet power of mutation. In most stories, mutation sounds dramatic, a comic book glow, a sudden shift, a superpower. But in reality, mutation is subtle, almost bashful. A single letter in a genetic code swaps out. A tiny spelling error in a 3 billion letter instruction manual. Most of the time, nothing changes. Or something breaks. But sometimes, something different appears. A new shade of eye colour, a different enzyme, a slightly faster heartbeat, stronger bones, a tolerance to altitude, a wrinkle of difference. And if that difference helps, even a little, it may persist. This is how evolution works. Not through design, but through difference. Not through goals, but through chances. Even now, mutations are happening. Right now, inside you. Your cells are dividing. Genes are copying. Most of it will be neutral. But over time, with enough people, some of those changes may become widespread. There's even a field called population genomics, where scientists track these variations across groups, looking for clues about where evolution might be headed next. For example, researchers have found signs that certain immune system genes are shifting in modern populations, possibly in response to viruses, urban living, or even our microbiomes. In women, the age of first menstruation has changed over the past century, a mix of environmental and genetic factors, but with potential evolutionary ripples. And across the globe, genes related to height, metabolism and fertility are still under selection, sometimes differently in different places. It's not a revolution. It's not a science fiction leap. It's the slow, steady beat of change. C. The edges of normal, evolution in extremes. Of course, not all evolution is average. Sometimes it happens at the edges. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called directional selection, when one extreme of a trait becomes more advantageous over time. Think giraffe necks getting longer, or cheetahs getting faster. In humans, we've seen small shifts in things like height, skull shape, and even pelvis width, a delicate trade-off between walking upright and giving birth to big-brained babies. But there are stranger edges too. In some populations, people have developed unusually strong bones due to rare mutations, denser, less prone to fracture. Others carry genes that confer resistance to certain viruses, like HIV. And there's an ongoing mystery around super-agers, individuals who remain cognitively sharp well into their 80s and 90s. Some of this is lifestyle, but some may be genetic. Are these the early signs of new traits, or just statistical outliers? Evolution doesn't label its prototypes, it just waits. And sometimes the environment changes so dramatically that previously neutral or even harmful traits become suddenly useful. This is called evolutionary reversal, like antibiotic resistance in bacteria, or seeds reviving from ancient permafrost. The past re-emerges in a new light. Could that happen in humans? Could a trait we once phased out become critical again in a new context? Some scientists wonder, especially as climate shifts, cities swell, and digital life reshapes our rhythms. Perhaps certain stress responses or energy efficiencies or even sleep cycles may become newly advantageous. Already there are studies exploring whether evening types, people who naturally stay up late, may have been selected for in ancient tribes to serve as night watchers, a kind of evolutionary insomnia. In today's 24/7 world, that trait might return, not as a disorder, but as an edge. Or consider empathy. In a hyper-connected world, being sensitive to others, emotionally intuitive, socially aware, could become more valuable than ever, but also more draining. Will future humans have thicker emotional skin? Or will we evolve new tools to protect our hearts? We don't know. But these edge cases, the people slightly outside the curve, may offer clues. Which brings us to the most boundary-blurring topic of all: de-directed evolution, editing the blueprint. Until now, evolution has been slow, reactive, unpredictable. But what happens when we take control of it? We've mentioned CRISPR, the gene editing tool that can precisely cut and modify DNA, a scalpel for the genetic code. Right now, it's being used to treat certain diseases like sickle cell anemia or inherited blindness. But in theory, it could be used to alter almost any trait: height, muscle tone, memory, mood. The idea of designer babies is still controversial and not yet happening in any legal or widespread way, but the technology exists. And that raises profound questions. If we can edit the human genome, what should we change? What counts as an improvement? And how would we even know? Evolution doesn't care about beauty, popularity, or intelligence. It cares about survival and reproduction. But humans care about everything. If genetic editing becomes normal, will evolution still be evolution? Or will it become design? Some scientists argue we're entering a new era, evolution by intelligent direction, where we don't just observe change, we cause it. But there's a paradox. The more we direct evolution, the more we may narrow it. Remove too many variations and we reduce adaptability. Edit out every imperfection and we might lose something we don't yet understand. After all, many traits we now consider valuable, like creativity, emotional depth, or curiosity, might have once been liabilities. Too dreamy, too sensitive, too distracted. But in the right context, they became gifts. So before we rewrite the code, perhaps we need to ask, do we really know what we're optimizing for? Or are we just drawing blueprints in the fog? And maybe that's what evolution has always done. Experimented blindly, felt its way forward, not with a goal, but with a question. What else is possible? Long-term evolutionary forecasting. The unknown. Known scientists have tried, cautiously, to forecast how humans might evolve over the next 10,000 years. It's difficult, not just because the genome is complex, but because the environment, social, physical, and technological, changes faster than ever. Still, we can look at trends, patterns, and pressures that might shape us. One hypothesis suggests that we may become more gracile, lighter, finer-boned. As physical labour decreases in many societies, and as machines assist more and more, the evolutionary pressure for strength may decline. You can already see this in some ways. Modern humans are, on average, physically less robust than our prehistoric ancestors. Smaller jaws, narrower frames, less upper body muscle. That doesn't mean we're weaker in the truest sense. It may mean we're optimized differently, for speed, flexibility, or energy efficiency, or for thinking. Brains are expensive, biologically speaking. They burn a lot of calories, but they've paid off. So it's possible we'll see increased brain-body ratios, though probably not dramatically. Our skulls can only grow so large before childbirth becomes even riskier, unless, of course, we evolve new birthing adaptations or rely on medical intervention as a permanent part of the process. Some theorists suggest we may also see neoteny, the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood. Humans are already somewhat neotenous compared to other primates. We have flatter faces, large eyes, and prolonged developmental periods. It's possible future humans could lean further in that direction. Smaller chins, smoother features, longer plasticity windows for learning. Why? Because social complexity rewards flexibility. The longer you can learn, adapt, absorb, the more prepared you are to navigate a changing world. There's even speculation that empathy could become more deeply wired, not as a luxury, but a necessity. In large, dense populations, the ability to understand others, to predict, reflect, and communicate across cultures, could shape who succeeds. Some projections even suggest subtle shifts in immune system genes, adapting to our changing microbial environment. Cities, travel, global food chains, all expose us to new blends of bacteria and viruses. The immune system, always balancing vigilance and restraint, may be one of the most dynamic systems in the human body over the next few centuries. And then there's the wild card, space. evolution beyond Earth, the spaceborne species. If we begin to colonize space, Mars, lunar bases, orbiting habitats, our species may splinter. Not in conflict, just in function. Different gravity, different radiation levels, different atmospheric compositions. All of these create new pressures. Already, astronauts on the International Space Station experience subtle physical changes: bone density loss, muscle atrophy, fluid shifts, even changes in gene expression. These are reversible for now. But what happens when generations grow up off Earth? Some scientists suggest we may see taller bodies due to less gravity, altered circadian rhythms, higher radiation tolerance, or metabolic shifts to conserve energy in environments where resources are scarce. In time, these changes could accumulate and diverge. Humanity might not evolve as a single species, but as branches shaped by different planets, different environments, different technologies. It's a possibility that feels more science fiction than science fact, until you realize the process has already begun. Any closed ecosystem, including a space colony, creates its own selective pressures: limited oxygen, filtered light, confined space. These shape behavior, physiology, even psychology. Will Martian humans still see Earth as home or as origin? Will they need stronger bones, thicker skin, different lungs? Will they evolve differently, or simply modify themselves? And what happens if evolution becomes artificial, but permanent? G. The threshold of speciation. When do we become other? Here's a quiet, strange idea. At what point do we stop being human as we now understand it? If we change gradually, no one notices. Just as Homo sapiens once emerged from ancestral species, so too could our descendants look back, not with shock but with quiet curiosity, and say, oh yes, they were almost like us. The threshold of speciation, the point where a population becomes a new species, is blurry. It usually involves isolation, environmental separation, and reproductive incompatibility. But with humans spread across the globe, constantly connected, is that even possible? Perhaps not in the traditional sense. But what if the separation isn't physical, but technological? Imagine one group begins editing their children's genes for higher cognition, disease resistance, or extended lifespan. Another group does not. Over centuries, those two populations could become biologically distinct, not by accident, but by choice. A new form of speciation, technodivergence. It's hypothetical, but not unimaginable. We may reach a point where humans share ancestry, but not biology. Where we live alongside others who are, in some quiet way, no longer us. And maybe that's okay. Evolution doesn't ask for consensus. It only asks, can this survive? H. Convergent evolution. The universe plays favourites. Let's pause though, and look from another angle. Sometimes, evolution doesn't create difference. It creates similarity. This is called convergent evolution, when unrelated species evolve similar traits because they face similar challenges. Wings in birds, bats, and insects. Eyes in mammals, octopuses, and fish. Even behaviours, like tool use, cooperation, and mimicry, have appeared in many lineages. It's a reminder that evolution, though random in its mutations, is often predictable in its constraints. There are only so many ways to fly, so many ways to see. So what does that mean for human evolution? If certain traits keep emerging, intelligence, communication, sociality, perhaps those are favoured, not by design, but by the logic of survival. If we were to evolve again from scratch, perhaps we would still become social, storytelling, curious. Perhaps there is such a thing as inevitable complexity, not because the universe prefers us, but because certain forms simply work. The paradox of conscious evolution. And now we arrive at the softest paradox of all. We are the only species we know of that knows it is evolving. That's a heavy thought, and a hopeful one. We can change, but we also choose how to change, and that makes us both the sculptor and the clay. We are nature, but self-aware. We are chance, with reflection. We are evolving, and we are watching ourselves evolve. What other species builds telescopes to study its own origins, or language to describe its uncertainty, or bedtime stories to soften the questions? Maybe evolution gave us curiosity not as a tool, but as a comfort. Maybe wonder is its own kind of adaptation, a way to carry on despite not knowing where we're going. And maybe that's the most human thing of all, not our thumbs, not our tech, not our genes, but our longing to understand what we might become. To look at the story of how humans have understood evolution is to trace not just the history of science, but the unfolding of self-awareness. It's the story of a species slowly turning inward, asking itself not just what are we, but how did we get here, and where are we going? And like all human stories, it doesn't begin with data. It begins with wonder. Thousands of years before the word evolution existed, people looked at their bodies, at the sky, the animals, the rivers, and saw patterns. Change, growth, death, rebirth, the cycles of nature. In some cultures, these were explained through myth, powerful poetic frameworks that connected the human form to the divine. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay and breath shaped the first humans. In Hindu tradition, humans emerge in cycles, yugas, vast epochs of time, each bringing a different moral and physical condition. In indigenous Australian stories, humans are shaped by ancestral beings in the dreamtime, the timeless, formative realm beneath ordinary life. These weren't evolutionary theories, they were cosmologies, ways of being, but buried in them was a truth science would echo centuries later. We are part of the world, not separate from it. Still, for most of history, humanity saw itself as a fixed creation, made, not made by. In the West, particularly under Abrahamic religious frameworks, humans were believed to be formed in the image of a creator, distinct from animals, imbued with reason, language, and a soul. Change, if it happened, was moral or spiritual, not physical. This idea endured for centuries, even as naturalists in the 1600s and 1700s began to classify animals, explore anatomy, and chart similarities between species. The notion of common descent remained too radical, too uncomfortable. Why? Because it collapsed the hierarchy. If humans came from animals, the line between us and them blurred. If we were evolving, then what we are now was not permanent, and permanence for many felt like certainty. But change, that's harder to hold. Still, the evidence grew. In the late 1700s, a French naturalist named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck proposed one of the first full theories of evolution. He suggested that organisms could acquire traits during their lifetimes and pass them on, like a giraffe stretching its neck for leaves, and its children being born with longer necks. It wasn't quite right, but it was revolutionary. It imagined life as dynamic, malleable. Then, in the early 1800s, Georges Cuvier developed the field of paleontology, studying fossils, extinction, layers of life beneath our feet. The idea that entire species had lived and died before us began to sink in. Earth was not young, life was not static. And then came a quiet English naturalist who changed everything, Charles Darwin. In 1831, Darwin boarded the HMS Beagle as a young man, curious, observant, not yet a revolutionary. Over 5 years he sailed the globe studying birds, fossils, islands, insects, geology, but it was the Galapagos Islands that gave him the most unsettling idea, that species could diverge, that finches with slightly different beaks might come from a common ancestor. That variation, given enough time, could lead to transformation. He returned to England and thought, for 2 decades. He read, he raised pigeons, he wrote letters, he doubted, he delayed. because he knew that publishing his theory would shake the world. In 1859, he finally released On the Origin of Species. It didn't mention humans by name, but the implication was clear. We are not separate. We are part of the tree. Evolution, Darwin proposed, happened through natural selection, the differential survival and reproduction of individuals with advantageous traits. Those traits became more common over generations. Slowly, imperceptibly, species changed. It wasn't progress, it wasn't guided, it wasn't even necessarily improvement, just change, shaped by the pressures of environment and biology. At first, the reaction was mixed. Many scientists admired the evidence, others were shocked by the implications. The public, meanwhile, fixated on the wrong part, the image of humans descending from apes. But Darwin never said that. He said we share common ancestry with primates, that somewhere, long ago, there was a creature that was not quite monkey, not quite human, but from which both lineages split. This is still true, and still a little unsettling. But what followed was even more surprising. As the 19th century turned to the 20th, new fields emerged. Genetics, pioneered by Gregor Mendel, whose experiments with peas revealed how traits were inherited. At first, Mendel's work was unknown, but when rediscovered, it provided the missing puzzle piece Darwin needed, a mechanism. Now scientists could see evolution not just in theory, but in alleles, dominant and recessive genes, mutation. Later, with the discovery of DNA in the mid-20th century, everything deepened. The double helix, a twisting staircase of code, carried the blueprint of life. Every cell, every trait, every change etched in 4 letters, A, T, C, G. This became the language of evolution. Through DNA, we traced the paths of ancestry. We discovered that all humans, all of us, from every continent and background, share over 99.9% of our genome. That the remaining fraction contains the story of adaptation, migration, climate, disease, and survival. We found that humans interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, that our ancestors walked out of Africa, spread across the world, adapted again and again. We mapped the human genome, 3 billion letters, and in doing so, cracked open a new era. Suddenly, evolution wasn't just about understanding the past, it was about editing the future. In the early 2000s, tools like gene therapy and genetic screening emerged. Then came CRISPR, precise, affordable, accessible, a way to cut and paste genes. Now, for the first time in history, we're not just watching evolution, we're influencing it, which leads us to an eerie shift in our self-understanding. Because evolution, once a slow mystery, is now a choice. We can choose to repair broken genes, but soon perhaps we may choose to enhance, to create. This raises questions Darwin never imagined. What does it mean to direct our own evolution? Are we still natural? Do we still count as part of the tree? Or have we become the gardener? Some philosophers argue that we've crossed into post-biological evolution, where the forces shaping us are no longer just climate, predators, and competition, but ethics, policy, and technology. It's no longer just what survives, but what we allow. Others suggest we've entered a new phase of cultural evolution, ideas, norms, inventions spreading faster than genes, shaping who we are even more than biology. And that's been true for a while. Fire, language, writing, cities, the internet. Each one rewrote what it meant to be human. Now, we may be nearing another rewrite, and yet beneath it all, the question remains, not just, can we evolve further, but should we? And into what? Do we become taller, smarter, more durable? Do we pursue longevity, creativity, empathy? Do we edit out flaws, or embrace them as part of the chaos that made us? These questions are no longer theoretical, they're urgent, active, global, and yet so very quiet. Because most of us aren't editing genes or designing futures, We're living ordinary days, drinking tea, laughing at pets, falling in love, aging, and in that ordinariness, evolution continues, unnoticed, unhurried, a gene passed on, a mutation unnoticed, a story whispered between generations. This is the true history of human self-understanding, not a straight line, but a spiral. Myth, biology, revolution, reflection, and now, responsibility. We've gone from clay to code, from breath to blueprint, but still somehow we remain human, soft, curious, unfinished, and maybe that's what makes this story so strangely beautiful. That no matter how far we look back or forward, we keep finding ourselves at the edge of change, wondering on what happens next. Let's begin not with a fact, but a feeling. The quiet one that arrives sometimes just before sleep. That delicate ache of being in time, the awareness that we are moving through something. A life, a story, a shape that is not fixed. We know we change. Day by day, cell by cell, thought by thought. We feel it in our joints, in our memories, in the way we outgrow old fears and find new ones waiting. So when we ask, can humans evolve further, we're also asking something else. We're asking, what is a human, really? And can that change without us vanishing? Because evolution, in the biological sense, is only the beginning. Beyond the mutations and mechanisms, there's a deeper, more delicate question. If we change enough, are we still us? And what does us even mean? Some thinkers, both philosophers and scientists, who have spent lifetimes circling this riddle. They wonder whether identity is tied to form or function, to memory or continuity, to consciousness or community. If you were to slowly swap out every part of yourself, cell by cell, thought by thought, at what point do you become someone else? If our descendants look nothing like us, think differently, live longer, perhaps don't die at all in the way we understand it, would they still be human? Would we recognize them? Would they recognize us? This is not a science fiction problem. It's a now problem. A soft threshold we're approaching, not with fear necessarily, but with a kind of wonder-drenched caution. Because as biology begins to merge with technology, and as culture evolves faster than flesh, we find ourselves in the middle of something that feels less like a species and more like a process. Maybe being human was never a destination. Maybe it's always been a becoming. And if that's true, then there may be no final version of us, just pages in a very long book, each chapter shaped by what came before, but never fully defined by it. We are not statues. We are songs in motion. And that realization brings its own kind of responsibility. If we can shape what comes next, how do we do so wisely? In ancient myths, there was often a warning woven into the tales of transformation. Prometheus brought fire to humanity and paid the price. Pandora opened a box she was told not to. Icarus flew too close to the sun. They weren't punished for change. They were punished for unquestioned change, for forgetting that power without reflection is not evolution, but hubris. And perhaps that's the central tension in this moment. We have more power than ever before, but no map for what to do with it. We can alter genes, extend life, engineer intelligence, even begin to mimic parts of the mind. But can we do all this while still being kind, connected, conscious in the ways that matter most? Philosophers have long asked whether we are our minds, our memories, our morals, or merely our material. And evolution offers no firm answer. It only shows us that change is the constant, and that survival favours what works, not what feels meaningful. But humans, ever inconvenient, are not satisfied with what works. We want what matters. We want not just to endure, but to mean something, which leads us to the strange, tender territory of existential evolution. Because we aren't just evolving biologically, we're evolving conceptually in how we think of ourselves. There was a time when human meant rational, a thinking being capable of logic and language. Then it meant moral, a creature capable of choice, of distinguishing right from wrong. Later, it became social, a being defined by its relationships, its belonging, its ability to love. Now, we might say a human is someone who can imagine not being one, who can imagine becoming something else, and feel the poetry in that possibility. This is where evolution becomes speculative, not in the sense of fantasy, but in the sense of wondering aloud, because no scientific model can tell us what it will feel like to be human in 100 years, or 1,000, or on a different planet, or inside a different kind of body, or no body at all. Will future minds live in biological forms, or in digital ones? Will we still dream in the way we do now? Will love still exist? Will death? Some thinkers suggest we're moving toward a post-human condition, not because we're losing our humanity, but because we're expanding beyond it. They see a future where consciousness is not tied to carbon, where sentience is shared between organic and artificial minds, where identity is fluid, layered, even communal. Others resist this idea, sensing in it a loss of something sacred. They fear that in chasing transcendence we might forget the fragile beauty of limits, the body, the breath, the story with an ending. And still others argue that this very tension between change and meaning, between power and humility, is the defining feature of the human journey. To be human, they say, is to walk the line between what is and what could be, between memory and dream, between dust and stars. There's something beautifully circular about it, because even as we gaze forward, trying to guess what we might become, we're also haunted, or perhaps guided, by our past. Our evolutionary history is still inside us, in our instincts, in our fears, in the way our bodies respond to hunger, to loss, to touch, in the way we flinch at shadows or feel peace under trees. We are ancient and brand new. Each child is a remix of an old song, and maybe the real question isn't, can we evolve further, but can we evolve fully? Can we carry forward not just our intelligence, but our compassion, not just our cleverness, but our care? Can we honour the biology that made us, and transcend the limitations that hurt us? Can we move forward without forgetting where we began? These are not questions with answers, but maybe they're not meant to be answered. Maybe they're meant to be held, like small glowing stones, like hands in the dark, because wondering itself is a form of evolution, an act of imagination, a choice to be unfinished. And perhaps that's the most human thing of all. Not the tools, not the language, not even the science, but the quiet willingness to ask, what else could we be? And to ask it gently, not with fear, not with arrogance, but with the soft awareness that life, all life, is a kind of story being told in motion, one we didn't start, one we won't finish, but one we get to shape for a while. So whether the future brings longer lives, sharper minds, new bodies or stranger forms, whether we stay here or scatter among the stars, whether we remain recognizably human or become something gently unfamiliar, let us hope that we carry forward not just our intelligence, but our capacity to wonder. We talk about evolution like it belongs to the past, but it's here, now, in every sleepy morning and surprising moment. You might not feel like an evolving species when you're waiting for the kettle to boil, or standing in line for groceries, or staring at your phone wondering why your brain feels like it's buffering. But you are. You, with your stretch marks and screen fatigue, your tooth enamel and playlists, you are the current version of a 4 billion year experiment. And even here, even now, the traces of evolution are stitched into your everyday life. Let's start with something as simple as your body. Your spine, for instance. It wasn't built for chairs, it was built for movement, for walking long distances, for climbing, for squatting to cook by fire. That ache you feel after a long day at your desk, That's evolution sighing through time, quietly reminding you that your skeleton is more ancient than your office. Then there's your wisdom teeth, or more likely, the lack of them. Many people no longer have room for those late-blooming molars. Our jaws have shrunk. Our diets have changed. We don't need to chew raw tubers or tear through sinew the way our ancestors did. And so, the once useful wisdom teeth have become evolutionary ghosts, remnants of a job we no longer do. Or consider goosebumps, a tiny army of muscles flexing around each hair follicle when you're cold or scared. Once this helped puff up body hair to trap warmth or look more intimidating. Now it just adds atmosphere to a dramatic piece of music or a sudden breeze. These are the echoes of older bodies still hitching a ride in yours. But it's not just your anatomy, it's your reactions too. Have you ever jumped at a sudden sound, then laughed at yourself a moment later? Or felt oddly satisfied by symmetry? Or craved sweet, salty or fatty foods, even when you know they're not what your body really needs? That's evolution too. Your fear response was forged in a world of predators. Your taste preferences evolved in an age where calories were scarce. Your love of patterns may have once helped you spot danger in camouflage or identify friendly faces from far away. And now, all of that shows up in how you decorate your home, choose your snacks, or binge a whole season of something because your brain really likes completing patterns. Even your emotions, grief, jealousy, or embarrassment, are survival tools dressed in metaphor. Embarrassment, for instance, is a social glue. It helps you stay in good standing with your group, which for most of human history meant the difference between survival and isolation. That cringing feeling after a bad joke or an awkward Zoom sign-off, that's your brain doing PR. Or take laughter, strange, isn't it? A sound we make when something is absurd, unexpected, shared. It builds bonds, diffuses tension, signals belonging. Long before we had punchlines, we had laughter, a kind of vocal handshake. Even crying, especially in sadness or joy, is thought to be a uniquely human behaviour. Tears aren't just for lubrication, they're communication, a way of saying I feel this deeply when words would get in the way. In these everyday flashes, your reactions, your habits, your instincts, you're brushing against millions of years of adaptation. And yet most of the time, you probably don't notice, because evolution doesn't feel like change. It feels like normal. It's the way your hands fit around a mug, the way you step carefully over ice, the way your heart speeds up when someone looks at you just a second too long. It's what makes childbirth difficult but possible. What makes eyes watery and skin flush and laughter contagious. It's what lets you walk, read, argue, sing, cry, and remember all at once. And it's in your daily routines too. Your sleep schedule, that's tied to your circadian rhythm and evolutionary adaptation to light and darkness, to sunrises and sunsets, long before alarm clocks and night shifts. Your tendency to seek novelty or get bored easily. That's a holdover from when curiosity meant finding new resources or noticing subtle changes that might signal danger or opportunity. Even your memory is biased toward the unusual. We're more likely to remember first times, last moments, surprises. Not because they matter more, but because in the wild the unexpected often meant survival or loss. And what about language? We speak because we evolved to communicate. Our vocal cords, our tongues, our brains, all shaped by the quiet pressure of cooperation. Language helped us teach, plan, warn, dream. It became the software of our evolution, allowing culture to evolve faster than genes ever could. And now, we carry that legacy in our lullabies, our texting habits, our bedtime stories. Even this, you, listening to a voice about science, perhaps while tucked into bed, is part of an evolutionary echo. Because storytelling itself is ancient. Long before writing, we told stories by firelight about who we were, where we came from, what to fear, and what to hope for. Stories were how we passed on survival. and comfort and wonder. You're still doing that now, just with different tools. It's not all poetic, though. Evolution also shows up in our frustrations, like the way our brains struggle with modern tasks, juggling email, group chats, spreadsheets, traffic. We weren't built for this pace. Our attention spans evolved in a world of slow rhythms and rich sensory landscapes, not pop-up ads and endless scrolls, or how mental health is affected by social disconnection. Loneliness, anxiety, depression, these are modern epidemics of an ancient design, because for most of our history we lived in close, stable groups, kinship, shared labour, eye contact, meals together. Now, many of us live alone, work alone, sleep alone. Our ancestors could never have imagined it. Our biology still hasn't adjusted to it. So when you feel overwhelmed by noise or underwhelmed by routine, when you crave closeness or solitude, variety or stillness, know that these too are evolutionary murmurs. They are not flaws. They are reminders. But evolution also brings something else, something more subtle, more personal. The strange way that time feels different at different ages. Remember when summers felt endless, when waiting 5 minutes was an eternity? That's not just nostalgia, that's biology. As we age, our perception of time changes. Novelty decreases, routine takes over. The brain logs fewer new moments, and time seems to contract. It's part psychology, part neurology, but it's also a legacy of how we evolve to prioritize new information, to flag novelty as significant, to remember it, to learn from it. And now, in a world flooded with novelty, sometimes we forget to pause and feel it. But evolution isn't just something we carry, it's something we talk about, joke about, speculate about. It shows up in movies, in memes, in metaphors. We say someone evolved when they mature. We call tech upgrades evolutionary. We draw evolution cartoons with fish turning into lizards, turning into business people with briefcases. It's part of our language now. Shorthand for improvement, progress, transformation. But biologically, evolution has no direction, no goal. It doesn't want better, just different. And yet, we do. We are the only species that imagines its own future forms, that writes speculative fiction about the next version of itself, that wonders whether we'll be taller, faster, smarter, kinder. You can feel this in everything from sci-fi films to spiritual beliefs, a deep cultural desire to believe that evolution is not just physical, but emotional, moral, meaningful, that we can grow, not just change, that we can be more, not just different, and maybe that's what sets us apart. Not that we evolve, but that we reflect on it. We see it in others, in the way a child becomes themselves, in the way societies shift, in the way we soften or harden or open again. We see it in how cultures change their values, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. We stop burning witches, we vote, we apologize, we keep trying. And so, in everyday life, evolution becomes more than adaptation. It becomes aspiration, not in the scientific sense, but in the deeply human sense of wanting to grow, to understand, to be something we can be proud of. Maybe we won't grow wings or extra thumbs. Maybe our DNA won't change much in your lifetime. But every day, in kitchens and sidewalks, bedrooms and boardrooms, people are shaping the next version of humanity through kindness, curiosity, invention, and connection. And maybe that's where evolution lives now, not just in genes, but in choices, in who we listen to, in what we forgive, in the stories we tell and retell until they become real. So tonight, as you lie there, still so wonderfully human, just know you're both a product of evolution and a participant in it, a moment in a very old story, and maybe, just maybe, part of what makes you human is that you care about how the story goes next. Evolution is not just science, it's story. And story, if you follow it long enough, turns into possibility. Let's dream together, just for a while. Let's close our eyes and ask, what if we could evolve in any direction? Not just the slow genetic kind, but the impossible kind, the shimmering starlit kind, the kind that rewrites what we thought it meant to be alive. Because tucked inside every scientific model is a shadow, a version not yet real, but imaginable. A version the numbers haven't confirmed, but the stories have. And when it comes to human evolution, the stories are rich with wonder. So, what if? What if humans no longer aged? Not because we discovered the fountain of youth in some mossy cave, but because we decoded senescence, the cellular aging clock. What if we could switch off the signals that tell our bodies to break down? Repair our telomeres, boost our stem cells, refresh our organs like software updates? Would we still measure life in decades or moments? Would love change if it didn't race against time? Would memory still matter, or would our species begin to drift slowly into something unfamiliar, not by how we look, but how we feel? We might become long-lived, calm, patient, or stagnant, numb to urgency, numb to now, or maybe the opposite. What if we evolved to live faster, to burn hotter and briefer, like meteors? Imagine a version of humanity where lifespans are 20 years. Childhood is a blink, adolescence a burst, wisdom packed into compressed time. Would we live more intensely? Would we form faster bonds, deeper in their brevity? Or would everything fray? Language, legacy, love? And then there's a stranger question. What if we stopped evolving altogether? Not by design, but by reaching some kind of plateau. Our environment perfectly adapted to us. No more pressures, no more surprises. Everything comfortable, predictable. It sounds peaceful, but evolution depends on challenge, on difference, on the strange. Without that, we stagnate. Not just physically, but culturally, emotionally, spiritually. What makes us human might not be the traits we have, but the changes we can have, the capacity for newness. So even imagining a world without change feels cold, like a still pond, reflective maybe, but lifeless. Now, let's turn gently toward the stars, because evolution doesn't end at the edge of Earth. What if humanity begins to diverge by environment? Martian humans, lunar humans, generations born in zero-gravity orbit, bones lengthen, blood shifts, circadian rhythms rewire themselves. Eventually, so much changes that we're no longer one species, but many. Some built for gravity, some for radiation, some who've never seen a sunrise on Earth. Would we still recognize each other? Would we still fall in love? Or would new forms bring new identities? There's even a term for this. Speciation by choice, not accidental, not random, but intentional divergence. A colony might choose to alter its biology to better survive, and over time become something else entirely. This isn't fiction anymore. CRISPR already allows us to tweak genes. Synthetic biology lets us design proteins, insert traits, control expression. If a spacefaring generation decided to alter their genome to breathe thinner air, or to live longer, or to interface with machines more fluidly, would that still be evolution? Or would it be something else? Post-evolution? Post-human? Science fiction has lived in this space for a long time. From cyberpunk to biopunk, from Gattaca to Ex Machina, we've dreamed and feared what might happen when we rewrite the rules of nature. Some stories paint utopias, humans transcending suffering, living in harmony with AI, spreading across the cosmos in peace. Others offer cautionary tales, elite gene casts, emotional emptiness, digital minds that lose all sense of soul. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. But even in fiction, there's a theme that repeats. Evolution is not free. It costs something. Sometimes it's a body, sometimes it's an identity, Sometimes it's a connection to what came before, and sometimes it's a mystery we'll never solve. Let's return to Earth for a moment. What if we evolved to communicate without words? Bioluminescent skin, colour shifts that show emotion, pulse rates syncing, touch that transmits thought. Some creatures already do this. Cephalopods, fireflies, coral. Could humans develop a new sensory language? Or perhaps, what if we evolved new minds? Not just smarter, but different, more collective, more empathetic, more tuned to patterns we can't see now. Emotional fractals, spiritual harmonics, time as texture. What if evolution didn't mean better apps, but better attention? Imagine humans who feel the emotions of others with total clarity, not as metaphor, as signal. Would that bring peace or overload? Would we retreat to protect ourselves or open further? And what about AI? What if evolution leaps, not through our bodies, but into what we build? Already we're creating algorithms that learn, systems that predict, models that write and paint and simulate. If we create something that outthinks us, is that a form of external evolution? Not human anymore, but human-made, not a child, but a branch. Philosophers have called this the intelligence explosion, a point when machine intelligence surpasses ours and begins evolving on its own terms. It sounds far off, but remember, evolution doesn't require flesh. It only requires variation, selection, reproduction, feedback, and computers are very, very good at feedback. So what if the next evolutionary leap isn't carbon-based? What if it's silicon or something else entirely? And what happens when that new intelligence looks back at us? Will it see us as its ancestors? Will it understand us? Will it miss us? There's a strange beauty in that idea, that the next version of intelligence might carry some echo of us. Like we carry the scent of rain in our DNA, the curve of waves in our hearing, the angle of sun in our eyes. But there's another angle. What if we're not evolving into something new? What if we're evolving back into something ancient, rediscovered? Some have suggested that mystical experiences, those states of unity, of timelessness, of ego-dissolving peace, may reflect ancient modes of consciousness, pre-language, pre-self. Maybe in some distant past our ancestors felt more merged, less isolated, more woven into the world, and maybe our evolution is actually a return, not regression, but reintegration, not forward or backward, just through. In this view, evolution isn't a ladder, it's a spiral. You move, you shift, you change, but you return, not to the same place, but to the same truth, seen with new eyes. That we're not separate from the world, that we are not finished, that we are not alone, and maybe, in the end, the biggest paradox of human evolution is this. The more we evolve, in intelligence, in technology, in reach, the more we are asked to remember the simplest things: kindness, stillness, touch, sleep, breath. The wild is still in us, the child, the animal, the ancestor. And if we go too far in one direction, become too cold, too engineered, too edited, maybe evolution will bring us back, not because it wants to, but because what survives is what feels. So yes, we can imagine humans with wings, with neural links, with glass skin and star maps for eyes. But we can also imagine something smaller, more subtle, humans who listen more, who slow down, who remember what it's like to wonder. Because that too is a kind of evolution. And maybe, just maybe, the real future of humanity isn't in the stars, or in the code, or even in the genes. Maybe it's in a quiet moment, like this one, where we remember that we can imagine more and choose not just what we can become, but who we want to be. Maybe we never really asked whether humans could evolve further. Maybe what we were asking was whether we could become something more beautiful. You've travelled far tonight, through biology and myth, through futures imagined and pasts remembered. You've followed the winding thread of change, not just in bodies but in stories, in sleep, in silence. And now, here we are, back at the edge of the question, back at the quiet. Can humans evolve further? The simplest answer is yes. Of course, we are evolving, always, in our cells, in our choices, in our conversations, in the way we love, in the way we grow up faster or slower, in the rituals we invent when the old ones fall away, in the fears we carry and the fears we let go. We're evolving in the way we treat one another, in the way we treat the planet, in what we define as strength, in how we define we. But deeper down, beneath the genetics, the theories, the timelines, the real question isn't about biology, it's about becoming. Because evolution, at its root, is not a science of control, it's a science of surprise, a slow, unwinding miracle of maybe. And maybe, just maybe. We're not just passengers in that process. Maybe we are participants, maybe even co-authors. We know now that our brains are plastic, that we reshape ourselves through every experience. That memory is not a file, but a living impression. That learning changes structure, that love changes chemistry. We know that technology lets us push boundaries, that ethics let us pause, that awe lets us stay soft, even when everything else asks us to be sharp. We've seen what we were, what we are, what we might be. But even now, with all our maps and scans and models, we still do not know the shape of what comes next, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the most evolved trait of all is the ability to stay open, to the unknown, to each other, to wonder. Because wonder isn't weakness, it's what evolution feels like from the inside. It's the emotion of change, of possibility, of being unfinished, and okay with it. So let's return, gently, to our original metaphor. If we said that time was not a line, but a mirror, then maybe evolution is not a ladder. Maybe it's a lantern. A small flicker of light carried from generation to generation, not to outshine the dark, but to illuminate the way through it. We've seen this lantern passed before, from the first humans who shaped tools from stone, to the ones who shaped songs from sorrow, from fire circles to fiber optics, from myths to medicine, from grief to grace, and always, this little spark. The question what else is possible, that question has shaped continents, cultures, cures. It's whispered in the hush before a leap. It's stitched into lullabies, into blueprints, into the trembling hands of those who reach for something they cannot quite name. That reaching is evolution, not the reaching up, not progress or perfection, but the reaching out, toward one another, toward new ways of seeing, new ways of being. And sometimes it looks like science, sometimes it looks like a child's drawing of a person with wings, sometimes it looks like forgiveness, and all of it counts. All of it becomes part of the slow rewriting of what it means to be alive. It's tempting to think of evolution as cold, mutation and survival, competition and chance. But evolution also made laughter. It made lullabies. It made the ache we feel when we watch someone we love fall asleep. It made this, you, here, now, wondering gently about what comes next. So perhaps the most important part of this reflection is that there is no final form, no version of us that ends the story. Because the story was never meant to end. It loops, it spirals, it surprises, and we go with it. We stumble, we learn, we try again. And over time, through parenting and philosophy, through art and accident, we change. Not just how we look, but how we live, how we hold sadness, how we make peace, how we name beauty. It's slow, often invisible, but it matters. The small kindness, the honest pause, the idea that catches in your throat because it makes you feel something you didn't expect. These are also part of our evolution, just as much as genes and gestures, maybe more. because they shape not just our survival, but our continuity. They shape who we carry forward and how. So can humans evolve further? Yes, and we are. Right now, in bedtime rituals, in second chances, in holding back judgment for one more breath, in remembering that evolution doesn't ask us to be perfect. It just asks us to adapt, to notice, to keep going, and to be open to the mystery of who we're becoming. So let yourself wonder tonight, not to find an answer, but to float gently in the knowing that life, all life, is a process of becoming. You're not behind, you're not late, you're not alone. You're exactly where evolution has brought you, and where it will go next. That's the most beautiful part, because it depends in small, soft ways on you, your kindness, your curiosity, your willingness to ask, what if the next version of humanity is a little more awake, a little more tender, a little more ready to dream together? And then one day, not soon, not loudly, but one day, we'll look back at who we were tonight and say, that was a beginning. So where are you now? What time is it? Are you drifting already, somewhere between thought and dream, or still awake, floating softly in that wide blue space between questions? Wherever you are, in your bed, on a quiet train, curled up on a couch with moonlight on your wall, thank you for being here, for wondering with me, for resting inside this question for a little while. We've travelled a long way tonight, from the earliest myths of what made us human, to the edge of distant futures where we may be something else entirely. And through it all, you remained curious, gentle, open. That is a kind of evolution too. So if this brought you a moment of peace, if your thoughts feel just a little quieter now, like a sky after rain, consider liking, subscribing, or simply returning the next time you need a soft place to land. This space will be here, waiting. And now, there's nothing more to understand. No final thought to chase. Just this. You're part of something vast and unfinished. You're both the question and the continuation. So rest well, fellow traveller, wherever and whenever you are. Sleep is a kind of transformation too. And who knows what might change while you dream. Good night.